Jalen was an ordinary man, living on the far edge of Earth's first colony city. His house was small, simple, and quiet, standing at the border where steel towers met the empty plains. To many, it was a lonely place. To Jalen, it was simply life. He worked long hours at the shipyards, repairing hulls, replacing engines, and crawling through machines until his hands were sore. By the time he returned home, he had little strength left. Cooking felt heavy, cleaning felt endless, and speaking to neighbors felt impossible. That was why he hired Asha. Asha was not human. She belonged to the Iroth, one of the first alien races humanity had met after stepping beyond their star. The Iroth were tall, graceful, and strange to human eyes. Their skin carried faint silver lines that glowed in low light. Their voices were soft and airy, and their movements were so precise that it seemed as though they floated rather than walked. Many Iroth took work as caretakers or assistants on Earth. They were trusted for their calm nature, their discipline, and their ability to complete tasks without complaint. Asha was all of those things. Every morning she arrived exactly on time. She carried her cleaning kit in a small silver case, polished until it reflected light like a mirror. She would bow slightly at the doorway, step inside, and begin her quiet work. She cleaned floors, folded clothes, and arranged objects so carefully that Jalen never found anything misplaced. If she needed something, she spoke politely, but her words were always short. When she finished her duties, she bowed again and left, leaving behind only the scent of fresh air and order. For months, this was their rhythm. At first, Jalen did not think much of her. She was quiet and he was tired. Their conversations were small, like raindrops. "Do you need more detergent?" "Yes, please." "Shall I leave food in the cooler?" "Only if it is no trouble." And then silence again. But slowly, Jalen began to notice things. He noticed how carefully she avoided his gaze. He noticed how she always touched objects with the very tips of her long fingers, as if afraid to disturb them too much. He noticed how she hummed faintly while cleaning, a melody without words, strange and haunting. He did not understand it, but somehow it made the empty rooms feel warmer. Yet still, Jalen kept his distance. He believed it was better that way. Humans and Iroth might live side by side now, but they were still different. He thought Asha would not care to know him, not really, but Jalen had a secret. Every night when Asha was gone and the house was quiet, he performed a small ritual. It was not something he ever showed to anyone, not even his closest friends. He would take out an old wooden chair, rough with age, the last gift from his grandfather. He would place a battered photograph on the table, a picture of his mother, smiling on a bright earth morning long ago. Then he would light a single candle, and he would sit there. Sometimes he whispered to the photograph, telling it about his day, about the ships he fixed, about the ache in his back. Sometimes he said nothing, only watching the flame tremble, only listening to the silence that pressed in from all sides, and sometimes he wept quietly where no one could see. This was Jalen's way of remembering, his way of holding on. To others, it might look strange, even foolish, but to him it was survival. His mother's face, his grandfather's chair, the flame of the candle, these were the threads that kept him tied to something greater than himself, and he was glad no one ever saw him like this. Not his co-workers, not his neighbors, not even Asha, who moved through his home with careful hands, especially not Asha. For Jalen believed that if she ever saw him, shoulders shaking, face wet with tears, she would not understand. She would think him weak. And so night after night, the ritual stayed secret. Jalen in his chair, the candle's glow, the quiet whispers to the photograph of a woman long gone. He never guessed that one day, his secret would be broken. He never guessed that Asha, the silent alien maid, would walk in at the wrong moment, and he never guessed how much that moment would change them both. Jalen's life looked ordinary to anyone watching from outside. A tired man working long hours, coming home to a clean house, eating simple meals, and then sleeping early. But behind the quiet walls of his home, he carried something deeper, something he never shared. It was his ritual. Every night, when the sun sank below the steel towers of the colony city and the skies turned purple with the light of distant stars, Jalen began. He would set aside his tools and his worries. He would take the old wooden chair from the corner of the room, the one that groaned every time he sat down, and place it in front of a small table. Upon the table he placed a single object that mattered more to him than all the machines he ever worked on: a photograph. The photograph was worn at the edges, its colors fading after years of being held too many times. But the image was still clear enough. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. His mother. She had died many years ago, long before Jalen left Earth for the colony. To anyone else, it was just a picture. To Jalen, it was the last bridge to the part of him that still remembered warmth, safety, and love. Once the photograph was in place, he lit a candle. It was a small flame, fragile against the shadows of the room. Yet to Jalen, that flame was more than light. It was memory alive. It was grief turned into presence. The candle burned and he whispered. Sometimes he told the photograph about his day, how the engines had been stubborn, how his supervisor had shouted, how his hands still smelled of oil. He spoke as though his mother were still listening, still nodding, still telling him it would be all right. Other times he spoke of nothing at all, only letting the silence stretch between him and the flame. And then there were nights when he wept. His shoulders would tremble, his breath would break, and his tears would fall quietly onto his hands. He hated showing his weakness to the world. At work, he was strong. Among neighbors, he was calm. But here, in the glow of the candle and the stare of the photograph, he allowed himself to be small. He allowed himself to ache. This ritual had become his anchor. Without it, he felt he might drift into the emptiness of space, like a ship without gravity. It was not religion in the old sense. He did not kneel to gods or chant sacred words, but it was something close, something human, a way of remembering, of refusing to let the past be swallowed by time, and he never wanted anyone to see it, especially not Asha. To him, Asha was efficient, controlled, and distant. She was like the Iroth themselves, always composed, always graceful, never emotional. He could not imagine her understanding why a human man would cry before a flame and a photograph. He imagined her looking at him with confusion, perhaps even pity. That thought made his chest tighten, so he kept it secret. Every night after she had left, after the house had fallen silent, he would sit in the chair, light the candle, and begin again. Alone. But in the silence of those nights, something stirred inside him. Sometimes, while whispering to the photograph, he wondered what it would be like if someone else joined him, if someone sat across from him, not to mock or question, but to simply share the quiet. He shook the thought away every time. It was foolish. He was human. Asha was Iroth. They lived beside each other, but their worlds were not the same. And yet somewhere deep within, Jalen longed for that kind of understanding. A hand on his shoulder. A voice that said, "Yes, I know what you feel. I know the weight you carry." But that, he thought, was impossible. The Iroth did not seem like a people who clung to sorrow. They seemed lighter, untouched by grief in the way humans were bound to it. So night after night, Jalen kept his ritual hidden, believing it belonged only to him. He could not know that soon, by pure accident, the secret would not be his alone. 1. Evening. A shift at the shipyard would end earlier than expected. One evening, Asha would enter the house while the candle was still burning, while the photograph still watched, while Jalen's shoulders still trembled. And in that single, unplanned moment, two worlds would collide. The day it happened began like any other. Jalen woke early, dragged himself to the shipyard, and worked through the endless noise of engines and sparks. But fate had its own plan. A malfunction in one of the hangars caused a shutdown. The workers were dismissed hours earlier than usual. For once, Jalen walked home while the sky was still bright, carrying the weight of exhaustion but also the rare thought of free time. When he reached his house, the rooms felt quieter than usual. Asha had already finished her morning work and left, he assumed. The floor gleamed, the furniture was neat, and everything seemed in its place. Relief touched him. He thought, "Good. Tonight I can begin my ritual sooner." And so he did. He placed the old wooden chair in front of the small table. He brought out the photograph, the edges more frayed now than they had been the week before. He lit the candle, and the small flame trembled against the shadows. He stared at his mother's smile, that frozen warmth from another lifetime, and began to whisper. At first he spoke softly, telling her about the sudden closing of the shipyard, about how unusual it felt to return home early. Then his voice grew quieter. He stared at the flame, and something inside him cracked. The silence of the house pressed against his chest, and tears welled in his eyes before he could stop them. His shoulders bent, his breath shuddered, and soon he was crying, raw, unguarded, alone, or so he thought. The front door hissed open. Jalen froze. His head snapped up, heart pounding, but it was too late. Asha stepped inside, her tall frame bending slightly as she entered with her silver case of supplies. She had returned earlier than normal. He did not even know why. Perhaps she had forgotten something. Perhaps she had decided to polish the floors again. Whatever the reason, she was here now. And she saw him. The photograph on the table. The candle flickering. The man hunched over, tears streaking his face. Asha stopped, cold. Her long fingers tightened around the handle of her case, and her wide silver eyes fixed on the scene before her. For the first time since she had worked in his home, her perfect composure broke. She looked stunned, almost fragile. Jalen's breath caught. Shame burned through him like fire. He wanted to shout, to tell her to leave, to turn away and pretend. She had never seen this, but his voice refused to rise. All he managed was a broken whisper. You shouldn't be here." Asha did not move. She did not blink. Slowly, she lowered her case to the floor, her movements hesitant, unsure. Nothing like the graceful precision he had always seen in her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. The candle flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. Jalen's heart thumped so loudly he thought she might hear it. He wiped his face quickly with his sleeve, trying to hide the tears, trying to rebuild the mask he wore every day. But the mask was already shattered. Still, Asha did not leave. Her lips parted slightly as if words had gathered there but could not yet escape. Her silver eyes glistened, reflecting both the flame and the pain she saw before her. She took one small step closer, her long form trembling with something Jalen could not yet name. Finally, her voice came, soft and unsteady. "Remember them this way?" The words hung in the air like fragile glass. Jalen could not answer at first. His throat was tight, his mind torn between shame and a strange, unfamiliar relief. Relief that someone had finally seen him, even if it was the last person he would have chosen. He swallowed hard, staring at the candle, staring at his mother's smile in the photograph, and he whispered back, barely audible. "Yes. This is what I do. This is how I remember." The room fell into silence again. The flame wavered. Two beings, human and Iroth, stood on opposite sides of something both heavy and sacred. In that moment, Jalen felt certain his life had changed forever. For a long time, the room held only stillness. The candle flickered. The photograph watched. And between them stood two figures, one human, one Iroth, frozen in a moment neither had prepared for. Jalen wanted to disappear. Shame wrapped around him like chains. His secret ritual, the only place where he allowed himself to break, was no longer his alone. He thought, "She will think me weak. She will never look at me the same again." His hand twitched toward the candle, ready to snuff it out, to hide what could not be unseen. But before he could move, Asha spoke again. Her voice was low, softer than he had ever heard it. "You keep her near this way?" Jalen blinked. He had never expected her to speak first. He had thought she would leave, perhaps even pretend this never happened. But she was still there, her silver eyes locked on the photograph. His throat tightened. Words felt heavy. Finally, he whispered, "Yes, I keep her near. If I don't, I feel like she will vanish completely." Asha's tall form trembled. She took one slow step closer, as though approaching something sacred. Her long fingers hovered above the candlelight but did not touch it. Her gaze was not mocking. It was not filled with pity. Instead, there was something else, something he had never seen in her before. Pain. "You do not erase?" she asked quietly. Jalen frowned. "Erase?" She swallowed, her luminous throat moving with the word. "The Iroth. We do not remember the dead. It is our law. When one of us dies, we remove their name. We burn their possessions. We silence their songs. We say, 'Forgetting is mercy.' That pain should not follow us." Her voice shook, the calm mask of an Iroth breaking apart. She lifted her hands to her chest as though holding something invisible. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. "But sometimes, I dream of my mother. I wake, and the dream fades, and her face is gone, and I ache. I ache because I cannot hold her, because I am not supposed to." Jalen stared at her, stunned. All this time he had thought the Iroth did not feel grief like humans. He thought they were untouched by sorrow, made of something stronger, something colder. But here she was, trembling, in his small home, confessing that even her people's law could not erase the pain in her heart. Slowly he spoke, his voice rough but steady. We do the opposite. We hold on. Even when it hurts. Even when it breaks us inside. We remember. Because forgetting feels worse." Asha's silver eyes lifted to meet his. "And it does not destroy you?" He gave a bitter laugh, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Sometimes it does, but it also keeps them alive. At least here." He pressed his palm against his chest. "In memory, in the stories we tell." Silence stretched again, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of their words, with the unspoken bridge forming between them. The candle flickered gently as if listening. For the first time since she had entered his house months ago, Asha let her composure slip. A single tear slid down her smooth cheek, shimmering as it caught the light. Her lips trembled, and she did not hide it. She did not bow. She did not excuse herself. She simply stood there, letting her grief show. And in that moment, Jalen felt something shift inside him. The shame that had once burned so fiercely began to cool. She did not see him as weak. She saw him as human. Fragile, yes, but also holding on to something she herself had been denied. His voice softened. "You're not wrong to ache. It means you loved her." Asha closed her eyes as if the words had struck deep. When she opened them again, her gaze was different. Less distant, less guarded. She whispered, "I did." The candle's flame, bent as though stirred by their breaths. Two beings so different in body and culture, now stood joined by a pain that was the same. For Jalen, the silence no longer felt like shame. For Asha, the silence no longer felt like exile. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The air in the small room felt heavy yet alive. The candle's flame wavered, painting the walls with soft shadows. Jalen sat with his hands pressed tightly together, still fighting the traces of shame. But Asha's presence was no longer sharp or unwelcome. She did not leave. She did not avert her eyes. Instead, she stood as if rooted in place, her tall frame trembling with a quiet storm inside her. Jalen had never seen her like this. Until now, Asha had always been composed, silent, efficient. She was the perfect maid, the perfect Iroth, calm and untouchable. But tonight, she was no longer a picture of grace. Tonight, she was breaking. Her voice cracked the silence. "Do you not fear the pain?" Jalen lifted his gaze. Of course I fear it. Every night when I light this candle, I feel it. Sometimes it tears me apart. But it's all I have left of her. If I let it go, then she is gone forever. I'd rather carry the pain than lose her twice. The word struck something deep in Asha. She staggered slightly, lowering herself onto the floor, closer to his chair, as if her legs no longer trusted her. Her hands folded into her lap, long fingers tightening. Her silver eyes glistened, and when she finally spoke again, her voice was full of cracks like glass under strain. The Irith do not do this. When someone dies, we burn their name. We erase every mark of them. Songs that once held their voice are forbidden. Stories of their life are not told again. It is our way. They say it keeps us free of grief. Her head shook slowly, as if the weight of that tradition pressed too hard against her. But I do not feel free, I feel empty. My mother, she sang to me when I was young, a small song of comfort. Sometimes I hear it when I dream. I reach for it, but when I wake, it fades. The law says I should let it go. Yet still I ache for her face, her voice. I ache, and I do not understand why. Jalen leaned forward, staring at her in stunned silence. He had always believed that the Iroth were untouched by grief, that they had simply evolved beyond the weight of sorrow. But now, sitting in front of him, Asha's tears told a different story. They did feel it. They did ache. They had simply been taught to bury it so deep that even their own hearts could not breathe. You're not wrong, Jalen whispered. You're not broken. That ache, it means you loved her. It means she mattered. Asha's eyes widened, trembling with the force of his words. She shook her head as if denying herself the comfort. But my people say love must not chain us. They say memory is a chain. They say forgetting is strength. Jalen reached out and touched the edge of the photograph with his fingertips. The picture shook faintly in his hand. No, forgetting isn't strength. Strength is carrying them with you even when it hurts. It's letting the pain remind you of what was good, what was beautiful. Strength is refusing to let them vanish. The candle flame bent with the small draft of his words, and for a moment, it seemed to burn brighter. Asha stared at it, her lips parted, her breath uneven. She reached forward, almost afraid, and let her long fingers hover over the light. The warmth touched her skin, fragile yet steady. Her voice was barely audible. To keep them alive inside. You? Yes, Jalen said, his voice firm, though his eyes burned with fresh tears. Alive. That's what we do. We keep them alive here. He pressed his hand against his chest. Asha bowed her head and a tear slid down her cheek. For the first time, she did not wipe it away. She let it fall, let it shine in the candlelight before it vanished into the floor. And then she whispered something Jalen had never expected to hear. I want to remember her, even if it hurts. I want what you have. The confession hung heavy between them. Two beings, two worlds, standing at the edge of a truth neither culture could deny. Grief was not weakness. Grief was love, still alive. The candle burned on, its flame no longer fragile but strong, like the bridge now forming between human and Iroth. The candle burned low, its flame steady but soft. Shadows swayed across the room, wrapping the walls in a quiet rhythm. Jalen sat still, the photograph clutched gently in his hands. Across from him, Asha remained on the floor, her silver eyes fixed on the light as though seeing something she had been blind to her entire life. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was no longer heavy with shame or fear. It was fragile, almost sacred, like the pause between two notes of a song. Jalen could feel the air shifting as though the small room had become something larger, something meant for truths that had been waiting far too long. At last, Jalen broke the silence. His voice was soft but steady. This is her. He held the photograph out toward Asha. His hand trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of the gesture. No one else had touched this picture in years. Not a single friend, not a co-worker. He had guarded it like a piece of his heart. But now he offered it to her. Asha hesitated. Her long fingers hovered, trembling, as if she feared the photograph might shatter at her touch. Slowly, carefully, she took it from him. Her silver eyes scanned the faded image. The woman in the photograph smiled gently, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes full of warmth. To Asha, the image was unlike anything she had ever been allowed to hold. Her people erased faces like this. They erased names, erased voices. Yet here was a human keeping his mother alive through paper, memory, and flame. "She is beautiful," Asha whispered. Jalen's throat tightened. "She was. She cared for me more than anyone. And even though she's gone, I don't want to let her disappear. Not from me." Asha traced the outline of the woman's face with the tip of her finger. Her hands shook. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks, but she did not hide them this time. She clutched the photograph close to her chest, as though it were her own. Her voice broke. "I wish I had something like this. Anything. A picture, a song, even one word written down. But I have nothing. They took it all. They said forgetting would free me, but it only left me hollow. I can barely remember her voice. I cannot see her face unless I dream. And even then, it fades like smoke." Her shoulders shook. For the first time since Jalen had known her, Asha let herself cry openly. Her tears fell like drops of silver in the candlelight. Her long frame bent forward, and she covered her face with her hands, her sobs quiet but piercing. Jalen felt his chest ache as he watched her. He knew what it meant to weep in secret. He knew the weight of carrying grief alone. And now, seeing her break, he understood. This was not weakness. This was courage. She was allowing herself to feel what her people had forbidden. He leaned forward and spoke gently, his voice low and firm. "She lives in you, Asha. Even if they told you to forget, even if they took everything, the love you feel, the ache you carry, that is her. That is proof she is not gone." Asha lowered her hands slowly. Her eyes glistened, her face raw with emotion. She stared at him as though he had just given her something priceless. "Not gone," she whispered, repeating his words as if trying to carve them into her own heart. Jalen nodded. "Not gone. As long as you remember, even in pain, she is still with you." The words broke something open inside her. She clutched the photograph again, pressing it to her chest. Her sobs softened, but her tears continued flowing freely. In that moment, the distance between human and Iroth vanished. There was no maid, no master, no treaty between two species. There were only two children of different worlds, united by the same wound, the longing for a mother's face, the refusal to let love be erased. When her tears quieted, Asha lifted her head. Her voice was hoarse, trembling, but clear. "Thank you, and for showing me this. Thank you for letting me see what humans do." Jalen gave a faint smile through his own wet eyes. "This isn't just what humans do. It's what anyone can do. You just have to choose to remember." The candle flickered, its flame reflecting in both their eyes. For the first time since her mother's death, Asha felt she was not alone in her grief. For the first time, Jalen felt his ritual was no longer only his burden to carry, and together, in that small room, human and Iroth built a bridge, not of stone, not of treaties, but of memory and love. The days that followed were no longer the same. Jalen's ritual, once a secret held in the silence of his small home, was now shared. Each evening when his work ended and the shadows stretched across the colony city, he no longer lit the candle alone. Asha was there. She would arrive quietly, not as a maid, but as something different, something closer. She would sit near the flame, her long hands resting gently in her lap, her silver eyes reflecting the light. At first, she only watched. She listened to Jalen as he spoke to the photograph, as he whispered his memories, as he laughed softly at old stories of his mother. And slowly she began to whisper too. Her voice was uncertain at first, like a child learning a language. She spoke fragments. Her hair was long. Her hands smelled of herbs. Her voice, it was gentle. The memories came like broken pieces of glass, sharp and scattered, but each one was precious. And Jalen never interrupted. He only nodded, as if each word she shared was a treasure. The candle became their meeting place. Human and Eroth, grief and love, silence and memory. Together they kept the dead alive. But something else began to change. Word spread quietly among the other Eroth in the colony. They noticed Asha's eyes, brighter now, though touched with sorrow. They saw the way her silence carried a new weight, the way her movements no longer belonged only to duty. Some asked her what had changed. At first she hesitated, but then, slowly, she told them. She spoke of the human way, the candle, the photograph, the choice to remember instead of erase. She told them of Jalen's strength, of his tears, of the strange beauty of grief that was not hidden, but carried with pride. And some Eroth listened. One by one, they began their own rituals. A few lit candles. Others hummed old songs they were told to forget. Some even sketched faces from memory, afraid the images might fade forever. For the first time in generations, the Eroth remembered openly. To Jalen it was strange. He had never thought his quiet pain could spread beyond the walls of his home. Yet now he heard whispers in the colony of Eroth who gathered at night, speaking the names of their dead. It was small at first, fragile as the flame of his candle, but it grew. One evening, Asha spoke softly, as the two of them sat before the light. You have given us something we thought impossible. My people believed. Memory was a chain, but now I see it is a thread that ties us to love. Jalen looked at her, his eyes wet but steady. Humans, we carry those threads. Sometimes they cut, sometimes they burn. But without them, we are nothing. Without memory, we are only empty shells. Her silver eyes shone in the flame. She bowed her head and whispered almost like a prayer. You refuse to let the dead die twice. That is why you are strong. The words struck him deep. For so long he had believed his tears made him weak. For so long he had hidden them from everyone, afraid of judgment. But now, in Asha's voice, he heard the truth. His grief was not weakness. It was proof of love, proof of strength, proof of being human. And that night, as the candle flickered low, Jalen felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. Not because the pain was gone, it never would be, but because the pain no longer belonged to him alone. It had crossed the bridge between worlds, carrying with it a lesson neither species could forget. When the flame finally died, they sat in the darkness together. Not afraid, not empty, but whole. And somewhere in the silence it felt as though the dead were listening, smiling, alive again in memory.